Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a Triad production. I'm your host, Sharlee Dixon. My guest today is Mike Oglesbee. Mike is an acclaimed author and coach dedicated to helping individuals overcome their fears and mental health struggles. In 2011, Mike founded Maximized Mind, LLC in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, where he has since crafted a dynamic approach to address the root causes of personal and professional challenges. He is trained and certified as a clinical hypnotherapist, Neuro-Linguistic Programming practitioner, and business, life, and leadership coach. Mike is also an executive contributor to Brainz Magazine and has been featured on ABC television shows and numerous radio programs, including international broadcasts. We're excited to have Mike with us today to discuss breaking free from the cycles of anxiety and depression in his upcoming book, Bigger Than Fear. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thank you so much, Sharlee. It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor. I'm really excited to talk with you today.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it. So as we get started today, can you talk to our listeners about what happened in your life that inspired this path of your work, discussing overcoming anxiety, depression, and specifically the focus on fear?
Sure. I was a very troubled person, very troubled kid, anxiety, depression. I'm talking debilitating, dysfunctional, a lot of trouble. I was more of the rebellious type, so I lashed out. You kind of got the types that'll shut down and you got the types that'll lash out. And I was the one who rebelled and lashed out. And I struggled with anxiety and depression for so many years, most of my life. It was debilitating. And it was so painful and all the suffering. And there was always a part of me that knew that there was something great inside of me, something that always just kind of wanted to bust out. You know what I mean? And just really be something more. But there was always something holding me back. But that little part of me that always seemed to want to break free really drove me down a path of learning. And I've always been curious, especially about the mind. I've always had this idea since I was a kid that, we can achieve just about anything that we really, really put our minds to. I don't really know where that idea came from. It's just always been there. It's always been a part of me. And so that led me through this series of learning, many different things, starting with, going to school for psychology and NLP, which is Neuro-Linguistic Programming, which is a type of psychology, learning hypnosis and different forms and modalities of self-help. And through that journey, I started to learn about the mind. I started to learn about the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, programs, why we experience these things such as anxiety and depression, and how to really start overcoming them. And so along my journey, as I started practicing professionally and helping other people, there was a lot that I learned, especially about myself, which is one of my favorite things about working with people is it teaches me so much about myself.
Yep.
So I always tell clients, you think that you're coming in here and you're the only one who's gaining anything from these sessions, but you're helping me and you don't even know it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love that part of what I do. And so through this journey, this long, this seemingly, never-ending, excruciating journey of anxiety and depression, even suicidal ideation for so many years, overcoming that allowed me to really step into a role of what I call responsibility to help other people do the same things. And so that's kind of how I became a specialist in anxiety and depression, is through my own journey of healing and overcoming it myself. So, a lot of people think of anxiety and depression as something that you just are stuck with. You either have it or you don't have it. We talk about managing these symptoms, which is first and foremost important to understand that anxieties and depressions, things like that, those are symptoms. They're not actually problems. And sure, they could be problematic in your life, but they themselves are the result of deeper internal conflicts. Mm-hmm. And when you start to learn about how to tie up those loose ends, if you will, those conflicts in your subconscious mind, you really can live a life without debilitating anxiety and depression. And so through my journey, as I've learned how to do that and accomplish that for myself, I now teach those tools, those techniques, and how I did that to the people that I work with. And it is a phenomenal thing to see someone become free from the clutches of anxiety and depression. It's a life altering experience for both them and myself.
We'll be right back after word from our sponsor.
Are you preparing for a licensure exam in psychology, social work, marriage and family therapy, counseling, or behavioral analysis? AATBS is here to help. We have been supporting behavioral and mental health students to prepare for their licensure exams for more than 45 years, working with over 1 million students to succeed on test day and move on to the next step in their career. With products ranging from comprehensive courses to quiz banks and delivered live online, self-study online, and in print, AATBS has test prep solutions that meet every student's needs and learning styles. Visit us today at aatbs.com. That's aatbs.com and use promo code BHT15 to save 15% off your next purchase.
Nice. And we will get into some of those strategies that you teach the people that you work with in just a moment. But I'm curious of some of those cycles and patterns that you mentioned about anxiety and depression and things that individuals may experience. Can you talk about those and maybe even mention one of your other title books, Fight Back, and how it addresses those issues?
Sure. So many different people experience anxiety in so many different ways. A lot of people, I think, have an idea of what it is and what it's not, but it can be many things depending on the person because it's a very personal thing for people. It's not just excruciating pain in the chest, but that can be something. It could be something that keeps you from taking a risk, keeps you from making that phone call, or keeps you from doing that thing that you most want to do. It could be as simple as that. Or it could be as complex as, hey, I can't get out of bed for a week and even take a shower because I just cannot see myself getting out of bed. I'm just so afraid. And so it can take on many, many different forms. And so sitting with people and really talking with them about their own unique experience, you start to learn that it can be many different things. And I think a lot of people don't even know if they do or don't have depression or anxiety. And so people will come in, and typically what I find is when you have one, and this isn't all the time, and it's not a blanket statement, but when you have debilitating anxiety, you typically have some level of depression. I mean, how could you not? Living your life like that, that's, something that you just don't enjoy. And so that could take you into states of depression. So we typically find, both of these kind of walk hand in hand. And the way I describe this is anxiety and depression are pretty much the same thing, kind of like temperature. You have hot, which is on one end of the spectrum. You have cold, which is on the other end of the spectrum. And so anxiety and depression are kind of like that. They're just the different ends or the opposite ends of the same spectrum. And so one of the cool things about that is if you go into the middle between those two, what I call the core, because I do core work with people, then when you work from the middle out, you can affect both of those things at the same time. And that's one of the really, really cool things that I get to see doing the core work that I do with people. And so understanding how to do that core work is really about understanding yourself. Everything starts with the self because anxieties, depressions, things like that, dysfunctions, fears, those are all products of the self. And it's important for people to know that and understand that because if we believe that our external stimulus, the situation, the circumstance, or the condition outside of us is what's causing us these difficulties, these struggles, these dysfunctional states, well, then our state of being is dependent or determined by the things outside of us. But that's not really the case. Things outside of us don't really have a set meaning, and that's why each and every one of us experience them differently. And so the meanings, the associations that we assign, which is one of our greatest responsibilities, is to assign the meanings to the things that we go through in life. Based on those meanings that we hold inside of us, that's going to determine how we experience things. I often say how we identify something, especially ourselves, determines how we experience that something or ourself. And so what we really want to do, and the biggest aim that I have when helping a person is to help them change that core. And the core is always starting with the identity, right? And if you're walking around in this world as an anxious person, then you identify as an anxious person because you're going to identify with those experiences. And so we've got to change that identity. And so it's a growth-oriented model. It's not a path of action. It's a path that requires action. But the action that you take must allow you to outgrow those states of anxieties, depressions, or dysfunctions. So it's kind of like saying, you don't get in life what you want, you get in life what you are. And if you want something different in life, you have to become something different. And if you look at any person in this world, and this is really cool when you could do this, you look at any person, you look at the recurring results, the recurring conditions, and how they express themselves, you're going to see who they are. Because their world, because we all live in our own little reality, always reflects who we are. And that's why it's different for everyone, right? And so if you want a different reality, you have to change what's causing that. And that's you. It's always you. It's always the self. Now, some people look at that and they say, well, I don't really like the way that sounds because I'm not trying to do this to myself. Of course, we're not trying to do this to self, but whether we're trying to or not, we are. And the power comes from understanding that if it's coming from the self, all these things that we don't want in our life that continue to recur, well, then we have choices. We have the ability to change who we are, what we're doing, which will then change what we're experiencing in life. And that's complete and total power, right? And so even though it sounds bad and it sounds like something we don't want to hear sometimes, it's necessary if you want to get through these things and not just manage anxieties, depressions, dysfunctions, but to overcome them completely, because you can. You can completely overcome that. Nobody was born with anxiety. Nobody was born with depression. These are things that we learn. These are things that we develop through our experiences and that we take on and we practice them. I mean, think about that. We practice anxiety. We practice depression, right? It's like an addiction. You have to practice an addiction before you actually become addicted. We practice this. We mimic those people, those environments, and things around us until we become like them. And if we want something different, we must become something different. And so that's a growth-oriented path. We must become a person who does not experience that in their life. That's the key. If you just do something different without becoming something different, it's not sustainable. It's kind of like people that go out and they try to lose weight. They'll go on a diet. They'll lose the weight. Well, now the action will allow you to lose the weight, right? So let's say they lost 20 pounds. Well, in order for them to sustain that, they're going to have to sustain the action. Well, that diet's not sustainable, right? So once they stop taking the diet, once they stop doing what got them there, well, they're going to gain the weight back. And then they're going to go and they're going to try something else. And then that's not going to be sustainable because a diet's just not sustainable. And so they'll try something else, the next fad or the next set of pills, but they can't take that forever. So once they stop taking that, they go back to doing and being who they were before they did that. They're going to lose the results. And so when we take a growth-oriented path, we're not really focused on even the weight anymore, right? For the example of losing 20 pounds. So instead of going on a diet, why not become someone who lives a lifestyle that supports 20 pounds less? Let's eat in a certain way. Let's take care of our body. Let's appreciate ourselves in a different way. And when you become that person, well, you just simply don't live with the weight. And so many people, they tend to disagree with this at first, but using the example of losing weight is just as easy as it is to gain the weight. But the problem is we're trying to control the things that are uncontrollable. We're trying to control the weight. We're trying to control the anxiety. We're trying to control the depression. But we don't have any power there. That's why it doesn't work. But what we do have power in and with is our choices. And our choices will then determine what we experience. And so here's the kicker. And it's understanding the context in which I say this, but anxieties, depressions, and many dysfunctions, not all, but many dysfunctions, they are a choice. Not that we're choosing to do it, but that our choices are causing those cycles to continue to propel in our lives. And if we can learn to make different choices, then those new choices that we make in our life will create new results. And if those choices are growth oriented and they're based on becoming a person who's more resilient, who's stronger, who's more in control of their emotions, who knows how to regulate their emotional state, who knows how to regulate their thought state, who knows how to step into a belief system, break it down, and replace it with something that serves them, well, then you can become a person that doesn't live with anxiety or depression or many of the dysfunctions that are out there. So it really does all come back to our choices. But we're also only making the choices based on the knowledge that we have, based on the understandings that we have. And so leading into Fight Back, my book is really, it's laid out in 3 parts. And the first part is the knowledge. And so I always say everything begins with knowledge. Knowledge is power, and knowledge about the self becomes self-empowerment. And so you've got this person, for example, who's going out here and they're experiencing all this anxiety, and they're trying not to experience the anxiety, but they have no clue what the anxiety is. Most people don't even know what emotions are, right? And so I kind of explain it like this. For example, if you think of a happy thought, how do you feel? Happy. If you think of a sad thought, you feel sad. You think of an anxious thought, you feel anxious. You think of a depressing thought, you feel depressed. And so your body's going to react to your thinking. And so your emotions, really, at the fundamental level, are nothing more than your body's response to your thoughts. And so if we can learn to think more effectively, well, guess what? What's going to happen to the feelings? They're going to change, and we're going to start feeling better. And of course, we know the feelings, those emotions, those are the fuel for our actions. So when you start to take on a new set of principles, new knowledge, new understanding, then it's going to cause you to feel better, and it's going to cause you to do better. And by making those small choices and those small changes in your life, you can eradicate debilitating anxiety and depression completely. And I'm living proof of that. But we live in a sick world that teaches us sick things. So we have to be willing to step out of that. And I often say, if you want to get better, you have to be willing to let go of what's making you sick. And so change, we think of change as something that is difficult. Change isn't difficult. I mean, you're in different clothes than you wore yesterday, and the day before you didn't have any problem with that change. So if change was difficult, then you would experience difficulty with the change, any change, because change itself would be difficult. But that's not the case. What we really struggle with is letting go of the things that prevent that change. And it's so interesting. We will hold on to the pain for fear that if we change, we're going to be uncomfortable. And that makes absolutely no sense. But it's exactly what we do.
Yep.
The things that we run from and we are afraid of in life and we try to get away from are the very things that we live with. For example, I do a lot of relationship coaching as well. And let's say, a person comes in and they've got this fear-based philosophy. And so they're walking on eggshells in their relationship. They don't want to upset their partner. Oh, if I say the wrong thing or if I catch them at the wrong time, that, they may lash out at me. They may yell at me. They may fuss at me. They may abuse me in some way, verbally or physically. And so they walk on these eggshells out of fear. But what got them there to begin with? What made them walk on eggshells? The very thing they're trying to avoid. It's the very thing they already have. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense because we don't really think about it. But if we can be more mindful, and this is awareness, and I always say awareness is key to life because awareness gives you choice. And ultimately, your life is a result of your choices. And many people don't understand that power because they think that they are the circumstance of what they see and what's around them. They don't realize they're the creator of that. It's like, oh, well, no, I didn't cause this event to happen. No, but you put yourself in the position to experience the effects of that event. And so where do we begin with it? Where do we begin to start dismantling this idea? Well, first and foremost, understanding the power of choice and understanding that even if you're engaged or experiencing something you don't prefer, you can still use your choice to do with it what you desire. So you can do with what you don't prefer what you prefer to do if you'll recognize your choice in the matter. You're never stuck. I mean, life is always moving. You've never been stuck. Stuck doesn't even exist. Some people say, oh, I'm stuck. Well, that's impossible. Stuck means immovable. And at some point, you're going to move. Therefore, you're not stuck. And so, really believing that, and I think, again, believing in the possibility of change is a great place to start, because if you don't, then you're not going to go anywhere. You're going to stay where you are. Believing in the possibility of change, and that possibility can only unfold through our choices. And so that's really where that power starts coming in. That's where we got to start. And so a lot of what I do is I teach people, and that's kind of foreign to even the coaching field, is teaching people based on an idea that we all have the answers that we need inside of us. But I'm not sure I agree with that. I mean, if you never learned the ABCs, then it doesn't matter how much you meditate or how much introspection you do, you're never going to find the ABCs. You never learned them.
Mhm.
What you're doing is a product of what you learn, what you've experienced in your life. So we have all this dysfunction out here, and this anxieties and the depressions and all these things going on because this is what we've learned to be. This is important. I mean, we're literally taught to be afraid from the time we are, infants. Don't touch that. Oh, that'll hurt you. Oh, don't do that. Oh, they're going to hurt you, or you might make them mad. And, we are literally taught to be afraid, and we're literally taught to be anxious. I mean, look at the world. We've got more anxieties, depressions, and fear in it now than we ever have.
Yeah.
Well, how is that so? We're learning it. I mean, turn on the news. I mean, think about it. You had like the pandemic, right?
Mhm.
Coronavirus. Well, once coronavirus started coming to a close, well, now we got the war in Ukraine. Well, there's the next big fear, and then this one, and this one, and this one, and it will never stop. And so it's okay for that to be there. We don't want to resist that. We don't want to reject that. The system's working perfectly fine. I mean, anyone can look out at the system and say, oh, this needs to change, and this should, and that should, but the system's working perfectly fine. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's our job as individuals to make the changes within ourselves, be that change that we want to see in the world, and that's what will help bring that change. I mean, think about it. If every single person in life, every single person focused on becoming the best version of themselves, we would never need to change anything outside of us because it would automatically change. So that's where we start. We got to change ourselves. We got to stop thinking that everything outside of us is the problem. The problem is inside of us. And if we will go there, if we have the courage and the strength of endurance to go within, work on our stuff, work on our problems, work on our conflicts, the things that we don't like, start to release those judgments, start to accept life, start to accept all these things in life that take place, even the bad things, because they have a place. And we typically say, oh, the bad things shouldn't exist, but they do exist. So it doesn't matter if they should or if they shouldn't, they do. So we can live in a world that we make up in our minds of, oh, it shouldn't be this way, or it should be that way, or this is or isn't. Or we can live in reality and we can work on ourselves and we can make ourselves better.
And so then you mentioned a lot about what we need to do, but how do we do that? How do you work with people to change that mindset, to go to more of a growth mindset, or cultivate change, or being able to build resilience? Like, what strategies do you do or use to teach people?
Well, so the first thing that I do is I set a whole new standard. I have what I call the 4 golden rules. And golden rule number 1 is be good to yourself and never beat yourself up for mistakes and shortcomings. No growth comes when you beat yourself up, because it all goes back to the self. Regardless of which way you look at it, it always comes back to the self. And so So many people beat themselves up, they put themselves down, and they think it's just natural. They don't even think about it, actually. You know, most people will treat a stranger, most people will treat a dog or a cat better than they will treat themselves.
Mm.
I mean, really think about that. That's sad, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
there's some pretty strong language that I use to drive this point. I say, okay, imagine two people standing outside of you, and one of them's berating and criticizing and putting the other one down. What would you call that behavior? And most people would say, oh, well, that's bad, or that's negative, or bullying. Well, how about abuse? That's textbook, that's abuse. That's abusive behavior. I say, okay, well, do you have a tendency of beating yourself up and putting yourself down? Yeah. Well, let me ask you, do you want to be an abusive person? Well, no. Well, do you deserve to be abused? Well, no. Well, when you do that to yourself, that makes you both an abusive person and an abused person.
Mm.
Now, one of the things that that statement is meant to drive is we're not just talking about an action here. We're talking about a character trait. We're talking about part of your personality, who you are. Everything is driven by the identity, by who you are as a person. And so if you're doing these things, well, then that's a character trait. That's not just an action you're taking, right? And who wants to admit that they're an abusive person? And so that really hits people to the core. Oh my gosh, I don't want to be an abusive person. And every time I do this, I'm an abusive person, abusing a person. Whoa, that's not who I want to be in this world. And that's what it's always going to come back to. People do what they do because of who they are, right? Like if you interact with someone and they're a jerk to you, right? They're mean to you or something like that. It's because of who they are. It's never because of you. I mean, you could do something, you could make a mistake, and if somebody's going to be a jerk to you, they're being a jerk to you not because you've made that mistake, but because that's who they are. Maybe they're just a jerk, or maybe they're just a jerk sometimes, right? Whereas another person, they might be nice and they might say, well, you know what? Everybody makes mistakes. That's okay. Here, let's see if we can correct this, right? Because that's who they are, right? And so we really want to think about in this world who we want to be. What kind of person do we want to be? Right? Do we really want to be this dysfunctional person? And if we do, then let's just keep doing what we're doing because we're already that. But if that's not who you want to be in this world, then you learn to be something different because who you are in this world or who you're being, that's not who you are. That's who you've learned to be. I mean, if you grew up in a different country, in a different culture, you'd be a completely different person because you would have learned to be a different person.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so we start with the possibility, hey, can I learn? Sure, I can learn. Okay, then that means I can learn how to be a different person. And it's always going to come back to that. That's the core. That's the core work. And it's really interesting. A lot of the people that I do work with that for the anxieties, the depressions and things like that, it's rare that we ever even have to work directly on the anxieties or depressions. Because those are symptoms. We work on the core, we work on the factors that cause them to express themselves that way in this world, and we become someone different. So you always start with the self, and knowledge is the best place to start because knowledge gives you power. And learning about the self and understanding the self in a deeper way will give you the power to change yourself in a more significant, deeper way. And so we have to set a new standard. We got to become a person who treats ourselves well, and you're going to make mistakes and we got to be realistic, right? Truth is a big deal, right? We tend to make things up in our head. And when reality doesn't match what we've created out of thin air in our head based on our assumptions, we tend to think reality is wrong. And we look at reality and we judge it. Oh, that's wrong. It should be this. It should be that. It doesn't make any sense. We just made that up. Reality, on the other hand, is never wrong, ever. It can't be wrong because it's the only thing that's real. It's the only thing that does exist. And so we must look at life as it is. We must be realistic in how we approach life. For example, life will throw a monkey wrench in your plans. It will absolutely disrupt your path. I don't care what path you walk, it will disrupt it over and over and over. There's nobody that doesn't experience this. And yet we get bent out of shape. Oh, I can't believe that happened. Well, what do you mean you can't believe that happened? That's what happens. That's life. That's the way it works. So if that's the way it works, we probably should get really good at dealing with monkey wrenches. We should get really good with dealing with getting back up because life is going to knock you down, and rightfully so. Another principle that I think is so important for us to learn, something that's been completely life altering for me, is it's a philosophy that everything in life is a gift. And so when you perceive everything in life as a gift, you work from that perspective, which means you are seeking the gift in every single thing that you go through in life. And that's hard to see for some people, and it takes a little bit of training of the mind. But when you do that, you find that there is a gift in everything. I'm talking the good things and the bad things, and especially the bad things. I'll give you an example. I was working with a 16-year-old kid just the other day, and he's a tennis player, and he's been losing a lot of matches. I said, okay, well, first and foremost, we've got to get used to losing, right? In fact, what I want you to do is I want you to become the best loser you know. The best loser you know. And to do that, I want you to take every loss that you go through, and I want you to look at it as if it's a gift. And I want you to look and dissect it. Okay, where did I, miss this, or where did I mess up? What mistakes did I make? And I want you to take those mistakes and I want you to work on those. But you've got to view your losses as a lesson, and a lesson is a gift, right? Because I said, imagine winning all the rest of your matches from this point forward. This would be as great as you're ever going to get, because you're not going to get any better if you're winning all the time. You're going to stay where you are. This is the level of skill you're going to have for the rest of your life. Is that really what you want? He's like, no, that's not at all. I want to become, great. Okay, then become a really good loser and use those losses as lessons, things to help you, to propel you forward. Find the gift in them. Don't get upset. Don't get mad. And if you do, don't stay that way. Don't let your loss become a resentment. Let it become a lesson that propels you forward. Let everything in your life become something that helps you toward what you want. And so if you've got a goal, or, you want to get rid of anxiety, you want to feel good every single day of your life. And let me tell you, you can. You can feel wonderful. You can wake up smiling and thankful. I do it. I am literally living proof. And this is coming from a guy who, for 35 years had suicidal ideation. And so you can absolutely do that. And so one of the ways that I've been able to achieve that is my goal, to live the best life I can, to be happy, to be grateful, to be kind and compassionate and loving towards myself and to others, and just have the best life I could possibly have. And so if that's my goal, what I want to do is I want to make sure that everything that I do, everything that I go through propels me in that direction. And so that means that I must look for a way for whatever it is I'm going through to help me. And when you do that, it becomes helpful. And you start to realize, hey, everything in life is a gift, but my responsibility is to find the gift. It's not just going to present itself, right? I always say, if you're asking life for more, or God, or whatever it is that you believe in, and give me more patience. Okay. Well, you're not going to just get more patience. You're going to get more situations that test your patience so that you can build the skill.
Yep.
Life isn't just going to hand you things, right? There's a price we have to pay. Everything has a price. And so what we've got to do is we've got to take the responsibility to find the gift in everything we go through in life. Can you imagine living from that space? It turns life into a magical unfolding. And I mean, it is wild. Things stop making logical sense. So you stop using logic as a way to define life, and you start living a life that is kind of how I was thinking about it the other day. As a matter of fact, most people when they think of dreaming, they think of what happens as a subconscious process when they go to sleep at night.
Mhm.
But me, dreaming is my conscious life. I live in my dreams. I live in my dreams because I'm always thinking about that. I'm always moving toward that. And that's a very different life. That's not a life full of anxieties and depressions and suicidal ideations. That's a life where at every turn you're grateful and you're happy and it just radiates from you. And so I've worked to become that person. And that's really what a person has to do. If they want to change their life, they've got to become the person who lives the life that they want to live. And that's not a different person. That's just a different version of themselves.
Mhm.
That's really the goal. You want to get rid of anxiety? Okay, well, what does that life look like for you? What types of things do you do? How do you feel in life? What is your mindset? When that version of yourself who lives that life without anxiety encounters a problem or a situation or a struggle or a challenge, because they will, how do they handle it? How do they approach it? What types of things do they do with it? Do they use it? Do they make themselves better? Okay, well, once you figure that out, your job is no longer to get rid of the anxiety or the depression or the dysfunction, whatever that is. Your job simply to become that person. And if you become that person, you will have what that person has, because that's the person that does create that.
Yep. And so a lot of what I'm hearing is a lot of discussion about, like you mentioned, core work or even self-awareness and self-compassion. Do you find that it's important to use professional to seek out these techniques, or is this something that somebody can really do on their own?
Well, I think that most people have the capacity to do it on their own if they're willing to put in the work, right? And I think the biggest obstacle people face is consistency. And the lack of consistency is what breaks people down. Because look, you can do anything for a few weeks,
Yeah.
but then you're going to start going through what we call the terror barrier. And this is where your programs start to try to change out. The old programs that you're no longer feeding, I think of programs as like living entities, right? Like these mental programs, these belief systems are like living entities. You know, they're living their own life through you. And so when you go up against them, well, this is what your brain and your body knows to do. And for a few weeks, you may be pretty successful with your new program, your new habits. But after about 3 weeks, typically, it's not an exact science, but it's relatively close. But after about 3 weeks, those programs that you've not been feeding, well, they're hungry and they're going to go into survival mode. And so they have this defense mechanism we call the terror barrier. And that's whenever they're going to start coercing you, manipulating you to forsake the new programs and go back to doing what you did before. Now we see this, big time at the beginning of the year,
Mhm.
right? So the first 3 weeks, people are in the gyms. I mean, you can't even find a spot to park in. And so people they're all in. They're on the strictest diet. They're doing so good. The first, second week, third week, they're proud of themselves, but then they start getting tired. And then they start making excuses. Oh, well, you know what? I'm too tired today. I'll just do some double tomorrow. Or I'll go this weekend. Oh, I've been doing really good. I can have a slice of that cake, or I can have that donut. And then they fall off the wagon and they give up. And they go right back to being the person who does the things that they did before they ever started that journey. And it just didn't work. And it's just another loss under the belt. Right. And so understanding these processes that we go through, because growth is a process, change is a process, change isn't a thing you do.
Yeah.
I mean, and as much as we know this by looking at the reality of life, it's almost like we can't even see it. Even though it is something we see all the time, we don't pay attention to it. Change is not a thing you do. If you want to change your life, it's a strategy. It's a process, and you have to be able to go through the process. It's not an easy thing, but it's not supposed to be easy. And it's okay not to be easy because we can do hard things,
Yep.
right? But you must understand that it's a process. And so a lot of what I do, I teach that process to people. I mean, it's an actual process, and we all relatively go through the same process. It just looks different for each of us. It's individual because we have different ideas and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And what's really interesting is the things that stop us are usually driven by lies, things that aren't even true, that we tell ourselves. Oh, I don't really want to do that. But the truth is, you do want to do that. For example, let's say someone wanted to start an exercise routine. So they say, instead of getting up at 7 o'clock in the morning, I want to get up at 6 and I want to go work out. I want to start working out. Well, 6 o'clock comes the next morning, the alarm goes off. Oh, I don't want to get up. Well, no, you do want to get up. You just don't feel like getting up.
Mhm.
And so we live our life based on how we feel. What's really interesting is even though we have made the worst decisions we've ever made through our emotional impulses, we still allow our emotions to drive us in life. And if you live an emotionally based life, you will not live a fulfilled life because your emotions are not going to take you where you want to go. They're going to reinforce where you are. I mean, they're just a reflection of your thought patterns,
Mhm.
right? And so we can, with a more effective mind and a filter, if you will, to think through, we can, instead of living our life based on how we feel, we can live our life based on what we want to do. And isn't that really what we want to do? But it comes at the expense of the emotions. And I think learning about that and understanding those internal processes is so important and so valuable for making that change. And I think it's what a lot of people lack. I don't think we've been taught how to think in this world. I think we've been told what to think,
Mhm.
but it's really created a very sick society. We need to learn how to think. We need to learn how to use our brains in a more effective way. And we can do that. And so it starts with the learning.
Right. And so, Mike, you've got a book coming out, Bigger Than Fear, later this year, correct? And so, can you tell me about Bigger Than Fear and any other upcoming projects that you've got coming on?
Sure. Bigger Than Fear is really a breakdown of the growth process. And we begin with what I call a philosophy of empowerment. And so the book is really exposing this philosophy of fear, this idea that we're somehow inadequate to handle and take care of the things in life. And we live kind of under this suppression, if you will. I mean, again, you could turn on your TVs and your radios and then just about anything, and it's going to drive fear deeper into us. And I think a lot of it's used as a form of control. And so, what we want to do is we want to be able to step out of that. We want to be able to think at a higher level than that. And our fears are really what stop us from doing the things that we want in life. And it can look many ways. I mean, fear is often associated with something like a phobia, like, oh, there's a spider, or I don't like snakes. But fear is far more than a phobia. Anxiety is fear. Depression is fear. Grief is fear. Letting go or not letting go, that's fear. It's all fear driven. And it's so interesting because fear will turn you into a different person completely. Our lives become full of overcompensations. We try to avoid the things we don't want by becoming something that's inauthentic. And we can't really live a full and fulfilling life if we're not authentic. But I mean, you think about it, an authentic life is going to experience a lot of rejection. And that's probably one of the biggest fears people have. And so people conform. And the problem with that is, conformity is the ultimate betrayal because it's the ultimate act of rejection. It's us rejecting ourselves. And so we want to be able to move past these barriers. When you start a life that is empowering, you're going to go up against a lot of resistance because most people aren't living that life. And so people are going to try to tear you down. They're going to get jealous of you. And I always say that if you really, really want to be happy, you've got to become comfortable being the bad guy because people will make you the bad guy. They will make you feel bad. They will give you guilt and try to put shame on you and all kinds of things. And you've really got to be able to handle that stuff. And so, Bigger Than Fear is the opportunity to learn about how to handle that stuff, to learn about what that path of growth looks like so that you can become an empowered version of yourself, live the life that you want, make the choices you want, and deal with the consequences, because there are many. That's why most people don't do it. But everybody wants to be like those people that do it,
Yeah.
right? But very few are actually willing to do it, but also very few understand what that looks like and how to do it. And so Bigger Than Fear will walk you through the process of that growth so that you can become that version of yourself that you most truly want to be. And you're no longer living on somebody else's dime. You're no longer chasing somebody else's dreams or conforming, but instead you're being the greatest expression of yourself. And so that's really what Bigger Than Fear is about. Another project I've got coming up, which should be coming out here in a few months, it's just I'm co-authoring a book, Cracking the Rich Code, which is a really interesting and exciting project. And it's a book that's endorsed by Tony Robbins, got a forward by Brian Tracy. It's going to be the 14th or 15th volume, I believe. So that's going to be really interesting. And that's, me and several other authors putting different stories and things that are important to us together to help people. So especially if you're in the field of helping people, this can be a really rich resource for you.
Nice. Well, I know I'm hoping the same with our listeners, but I am looking forward to both of your new projects that are coming out there. As a practitioner, those are things that I would like to impart more into the clients and students that I serve. So I'm definitely looking forward to those coming out later this year. But in the meantime, where can our listeners learn more about you, your current published books, your other works, your blogs, your podcasts? How can we learn more about you?
Well, you can go to my website, mikeoglesbee.com. I'm also on pretty much all the social media, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or X, I think it is now, TikTok, I'm pretty much on all of those. Just look me up, author Mike Oglesbee. I typically will post, videos and things like that on a daily basis, just to provide some insight and some inspiration to help people along their journeys. Yeah.
Nice. Well, thank you for that. We definitely will be checking you out coming up and looking forward to your publications and your work that are coming. Mike, I really appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure and an honor talking with you. Thank you.
Mike, I really appreciate you speaking with us today. And thank you to our listeners for taking the time to join us. The resources for this episode and an archive of all of our other episodes can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. And we look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.